Welcome to our second session of our webinar series, The Skills for Success. So these are the skills that are currently very important to employers, and we're going to certainly be looking at ways in which you can demonstrate and develop them. So today's topic is overcoming imposter syndrome and building your confidence. And as a little reminder, this is part of our webinar series. We're going to be covering 8 topics in total, and you can see them there. We're going to be running 2 live sessions of each topic. But for those if you know any colleagues, any peers who aren't able to attend, we're going to be recording the webinars and we'll be uploading them to our YouTube channel, SRS Recruitment and Employability Experts. And Rachel will probably type that in the chat for me now. And we have actually got lots of other webinars and resources as part of that YouTube channel. We ran a series last year about the different stages of the recruitment process, so feel free to dip into our YouTube channel there. These webinar sessions are meant to be bite-sized sessions. I've said this before, but a lot of the topics that we cover, whole books have been written on them, week-long workshops. So it is intended to give you an overview, to kind of spark your interest, and certainly to encourage you to explore these topics further. The idea is that we're tailoring this content to be more specific to students and graduates like yourself. So hopefully you'll find it very useful. And please do get involved as well. So they are meant to be interactive. We do like to have a few Zoom polls here and there. So please do get involved with those. And also comment and post your questions on chat as well. So my colleague Rachel's going to be handling the chat for me during today's session. So keep her busy. And certainly if there's any questions that Rachel can't answer, we'll have a bit of a Q&A session at the end as well. Okay. So initial introductions. For those of you who don't know me by now, I've been on a lot of webinars. You may have seen me before, but just in case, I'm Helen. I'm the University Partnerships Manager for SRS and work with a lot of universities up and down the country, running webinars, workshops, practical exercises, assessment centres, to give you guys the edge when applying for jobs, to help you practice and prepare for that recruitment process. You can see my social media details there on the screen. And actually for the last webinar, it was great. We had so many students link in with us afterwards and send us messages. And please encourage you to keep doing that. And please do link in with us and follow us on social media. We love interacting with you. Rachel, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hello everyone, my name is Rachel. I'm the Operations Manager at SRS and I tend to be involved with the events delivery and setup. So if any of you have attended any of our assessment centre simulations, you might have had an email from me, and just likewise the same as what Helen mentioned, it'd be great to connect with you all on social media.
Brilliant. Over the course of the webinar series, you will meet all of our team because I'm joined by different people as we go on there. Okay, so let's make a bit of a start. So as part of today's webinar, we're going to be looking at what is imposter syndrome and what are the symptoms of it, what causes it and who gets imposter syndrome, and ultimately how can you deal with it and turn it to your advantage. But before we begin and get stuck into the detail, I would like to do a short poll, and hopefully that will launch on your screen in a moment there. So just 2 questions. Do you know what imposter syndrome is? Just yes or no. What percentage of the time do you feel like an imposter? I've given you a few options there to choose from. And just be honest, because there are some people who don't know what imposter syndrome is. Oh, there's a few coming through there, which is great. Just give you a few moments there. Brilliant. Okay. Just a couple more moments there. Still got some responses coming through. Okay. Brilliant. We'll call it a day there. And I'll just share those results on the screen. So 73% of you think you know what imposter syndrome is, which is great. You've certainly come across it before. And 27% don't know what it is. Thanks for being honest there. And I'm not going to lie, actually, it's a term that I only came across I think about 2 years ago. So to say that I'm almost 40, it's something that's only come to my attention in the last couple of years, but it's certainly explained a lot in my career. I'll talk about that a bit more shortly. What percentage of the time do you feel like an imposter? So 5 of you saying not at all. That might be, as I say, because you're not quite sure what it is yet. But the bulk of you, 25 of you, saying that you feel like an imposter 50% of the time, and 9 of you 75%, a couple of you the whole time. That's really quite significant there. So definitely we want to explore some of those reasons as to why you're feeling like an imposter, and hopefully you'll find some of the tips useful from this session around how to negate the influence of that a bit more. Okay, so I'm just going to stop sharing those results there. That should disappear from your screen. Okay. So the concept of imposter syndrome was first introduced in the 1970s by psychologists Suzanne Imes and Pauline Rose Clance. And it was actually originally thought to apply mostly to high achieving women, but it has since become clear that it is experienced equally across different genders, professions, and ethnic and racial groups. So in summary, having imposter syndrome means that you experience feelings of inadequacy and self-doubt. It's where you believe that you're not as competent as others. You don't feel like you belong, whether that's in a particular role, situation, or organisation. You feel out of your depth, and you worry about being discovered as a fraud, someone who actually doesn't deserve to be there. Now, these feelings are all felt despite very obvious evidence to the contrary, where you actually have clear achievements and successes that have led to this, that have led to you being there. Instead, you might think that a new role or opportunity has been given to you by mistake, or it was just down to luck. It wasn't down to your ability at all. So let's have a little look at some of the symptoms of imposter syndrome. Because you feel that your success isn't down to you, it means that you have an inability to recognise and appreciate your own competence and skills. Feeling inadequate might also drive you to work as hard as possible to make up for that, and therefore you end up putting a lot of pressure on yourself. This sets up a quite a vicious cycle in which you think that the only reason you survived that class presentation was that you stayed up all night rehearsing, rather than because you were actually good at it in the first place. Another symptom is you may never be satisfied with your level of understanding or performance. You'll probably set very challenging and possibly unrealistic targets, and then feel quite disappointed when you don't achieve them first time. You'll beat yourself up about this, and you'll fixate on flaws or mistakes you've made. And that perception of yourself as inadequate may also prevent you from speaking up, asking questions, and sharing ideas with others. And similarly, you'll see asking for help as a sign of weakness, because ultimately, you don't want anyone to find out that you don't know things. It's back to that point about feeling like a fraud. Now, let's be honest, there can be some good effects of having imposter syndrome. It can motivate you to learn and achieve even more. But no matter how often or what symptoms you experience as part of having imposter syndrome, it's always going to involve some level of feeling anxious, which isn't a good thing. So what causes imposter syndrome? And there's a few things here to think about. Parent expectations may play a big part in this. Perhaps they're overly critical of their children or overly critical of you. They may have set their standards too high, or even by giving general praise, such as, you are the best in your class at maths. That encourages that person, it encourages you to think you always need to be the best. So actually that positive praise can have quite a detrimental effect sometimes. Job hunting can certainly make you feel like an imposter because you're competing with others who have more or just different credentials from you. And you've got to now prove that you're qualified. We also know that entering a new role can trigger imposter syndrome. So for example, starting a new job or even joining a new university might leave you feeling as though you don't belong and that you're not capable. when you join and leave university, you're at a quite vulnerable in-between phase in your professional development. A common scenario would be a successful candidate thinking that to get this job, I had to go through a couple of interviews and give a presentation, but I think they were way too easy. Otherwise, I wouldn't have got it. The more enthusiastic they are about me joining, the more guilty I feel. And I've definitely heard that from a couple of candidates that I've spoken to recently. Remote working has also not helped with imposter syndrome, because if you're someone who sets yourself these unrealistic targets and standards that are too high, there's no one else there to keep you in check and help shape your work ethic. And by far the overriding reasons as to why people suffer with imposter syndrome is because of unrealistic and unsustainable ideas of what it means to be competent and an unhealthy response to failure. Something which we will cover in other webinars, because we've got one coming up on building resilience. So who gets imposter syndrome? And this is another opportunity for me to launch another poll. And just give me a second while I get that one in place. So I've got a question for you there popping up on your screen. Which one of these celebrities has suffered from imposter syndrome? If you can choose that. Give you a few moments again. Hopefully you know who they all are. Certainly some very famous people there. Okay, so we've definitely got front runner, which is good to see. Okay, just a couple more moments there. Okay, so we'll call it a day and we'll just end that one. Oh, two more coming in, fantastic. All right, I'll share those results there on the screen. So clear front runner there. 25 of you, almost half of you think Michelle Obama has experienced imposter syndrome. Next up, Lady Gaga, 18 of you thinking that. 9 of you have gone for Tom Hanks and 3 of you for Robert Pattinson. So some of you might have already twigged this, but this was a little bit of a trick question, because the fact is that all 4 of those people have suffered with imposter syndrome. And actually, I struggled to find some celebrities and famous people who haven't. Most of them do actually admit to having had this at some stage of their career, if not throughout. So I'll just stop sharing those results. So Lady Gaga, one of her quotes, I still sometimes feel like a loser kid in high school, and I just have to pick myself up and tell myself that I'm a superstar every morning so I can get through this day and be for my fans what they need for me to be. So she has to almost mentally coach herself every morning to remind herself that she is a superstar, that she is successful. Michelle Obama, the one that most of you thought did feel like an imposter, said, it doesn't go away, that feeling of, I don't know if the world should take me seriously. I'm just Michelle Robinson, that little girl on the South Side who went to public school. So she still carries that with her, that feeling, she's just a normal everyday kid. She doesn't know how she's managed to get where she has today. And in an interview with Tom Hanks, he said he often thinks about, how did I get here? When are they going to discover that I am in fact a fraud and take everything away from me? That word fraud, that is really the big definition of what it means to feel like an imposter syndrome. And then finally, Robert Pattinson. He said, in a lot of ways, I'm quite proud that I'm still getting jobs, because of falling into a job, you always feel like you're a fraud, that you're going to be thrown out at any second. So again, that word fraud comes up repeatedly. And as I say, I could have picked from a much wider selection of famous people and celebrities there, because it is so common. And this is hopefully a bit of a reminder that some of the most successful people suffer with imposter syndrome. There's some very famous entrepreneurs and CEOs out there who, despite years and decades of success, suffer with it. It actually tends to be worse the more successful you are. And thinking about the fact that being successful brings the added pressure of more responsibility and, in a lot of cases, more visibility as well. And just to give you a bit of a personal example from my own experience, I've certainly felt imposter syndrome, although I didn't always know it was called that. And to give you probably a more recent one, I remember attending my first higher education conference. So there was a lot of senior people there from university teams across the country. And I felt really awkward approaching people, felt really awkward joining conversations that I knew very little about. There was also a lot of jargon that I just didn't understand. But instead of asking for clarity, I just nodded along and pretended that I knew what they were talking about. And what I should have done was not have been ashamed of the fact that I was new to the sector. I should have asked more questions and seen it as a really good learning opportunity. Instead, I came away from it and I really beat myself up for not having made the most of it, for not having made more connections with people, for not contributing more. So that was an example when I started my career, when I moved from a completely different sector. Has anyone else got any examples of feeling imposter syndrome that they'd like to share in the chat? Any examples? Don't feel like you have to, but it's just out of interest. Please share any experiences. I'm always interested to hear what other people have gone through there, but we can come back to that at the end. So we're now going to explore some different ways in which to deal with imposter syndrome and even how you can use it to your benefit. And there are 8 key areas that I want to look at in turn. Firstly, it's only when you acknowledge the feeling of being an imposter that you can start to deal with it and explore why you feel like that. Try and identify what your triggers are so that you can prepare for these feelings in advance. There are also a lot of perfectly good reasons as to why you might feel like an imposter. Have you started a new job, for example? So in that situation, it's perfectly normal to feel anxious and unsure of yourself. And in that situation, you really do need to give yourself permission to feel out of sorts, at least for the first 3 months, because there is a steep learning curve. So it'd probably be a bit unusual for you to not feel like an imposter. Remember that no one expects you to know everything immediately. And a lot of organizations hire people based on their potential rather than what they've already achieved. They will have hired you because they've seen something in you that they know they can work with. When you normalize the anxiety of a new role, you're less likely to judge yourself as an imposter. Going back to that point around giving yourself permission to feel awkward. Finally, you should remember that if you are feeling like an imposter, it means that you have some degree of success in your life. Even if you do think of it as a mistake or pure luck, it definitely means that you've done something right, you've done something well. To help combat imposter syndrome, it's really important as well to adopt a growth mindset. Now, again, I'm not going to spend too long talking about this as I do cover it in an earlier webinar. So it was part of our motivation webinar last week, which is now a recording on our YouTube channel. But as part of having a growth mindset, it's being able to recognize your feelings. It's about being curious and keen to learn, going outside of your comfort zone and being resilient. And if I was wanting to link it more specifically to imposter syndrome, we're less likely to feel like an imposter when we consider ourselves to be a work in progress rather than a finished article. So appreciate the fact that you're always learning and developing rather than you need to be finished. You need to have nailed this job and know everything by a certain point. So imposter syndrome, as we've seen, is very common. And so by sharing your feeling with others, you'll quickly realize that other colleagues or people around you are experiencing the same thing. And it is always good to have a support network of people you can discuss it with. Ideally, people who can relate to what you're going through, who will remind you of your achievements and give you some positive reinforcement. And I think Sophie, my colleague, mentioned in an earlier webinar the importance of having that tribe around you, people who can share your experiences and build you up, part of being motivated as well. And it could be that you have some friends or people who are completely outside of the situation. But if you are starting a new role or taking on a new opportunity, it's definitely a good idea to have a mentor. Now, people often feel like imposters because they're trying to achieve a level of success that does not fit with who they are or what they want from work or life in general. And instead of comparing yourself to others, you really need to focus on your values and what's important to you. Define what success looks like for you. And this is such an important point. It's a very important point that I've had to learn because on social media in particular, you see so many success stories. But what you don't see is the hard work that has gone into that success, the mistakes they've made along the way. So try and avoid comparing yourself to others and actually look at what you yourself have achieved. What is it you want? Some of your friends might want to ultimately be high-flying people in finance, and you might think that you're not successful as them. But if actually all you want is to work perhaps for a small business in a HR department or in a charity, you know, if you achieve that, that's you being successful because it's what's important to you. And again, there's a whole topic around exploring your values, defining what your strengths are, and that is covered a little bit in our motivation webinar and also in our values job searching webinar on our YouTube channel. You see a lot of these areas feed into each other. It's important to review your goals and your expectations and establish whether or not they're realistic. So thinking about starting a new job, you won't be increasing sales by 5% until you know what you're selling. Break a target like this down into smaller objectives, such as shadow sales managers, and demonstrate an understanding of the product or service you're selling. You should never expect to know everything at the beginning, or indeed ever. There is always something new to learn. Make time to reflect on and record your achievements. Really accentuate the positive. And when you're doing this, separate feelings from facts. Question your thoughts. Are they rational? Because you might not want to write some achievements down because you don't think they're important enough. And you think, oh, everyone does that. But it is important to look back at what you have achieved and do that for whatever works for you, whether that's weekly, monthly at the very least, I would say. But certainly at the end of each day, I like to look back at what I've managed to achieve each day. And it's about looking at those facts. It's really important to have a healthy and realistic self-perception that recognizes your personal growth, your personal progress. So having imposter syndrome can feel incredibly isolating because by its very nature, it's something which makes you feel as though you don't belong. It can also prevent you from taking advantage of new opportunities at university or in the workplace. And having a sense of belonging definitely increases confidence. And so it's important to find or create a community. And once you feel comfortable in that community, you start demonstrating that confidence with others and gradually in other areas too. And I like this. Someone said this to me a little while ago. Get out of your comfort zone to ultimately be more comfortable. And thinking about some examples of this, I've seen new employees join or set up social events, online communities, or at university, you know, students have set up and led their own study groups, created their own clubs. So as I say, to feel like you belong more, do get out there, do join those groups. And something that I've seen with employers, particularly recently, with a lot of interaction having to go online, whether that's recruitment or inductions, they're investing a lot of time and effort into creating that feeling of belonging in candidates and in their new employees by creating new groups, new situations in which they can interact. Something that's important to remember is you don't necessarily need to overcome imposter syndrome. You just need to reframe it and rewrite your mental script. So for example, rather than thinking, I am an imposter, change this to, I may not know all the answers, but I am intelligent enough to find the answer. Be your own inner coach and question those knee-jerk thoughts and feelings that pop into your head. Remember, being competent isn't necessarily about needing to know everything. It's about being able to identify the resources it takes to get the job done. Change those negative thoughts into a positive next step that you can take on. So just to reinforce this point, I wanted to share a quote from Dr. Valerie Young, who's an expert in the imposter syndrome. She's someone I would recommend looking at TEDx talks and reading her books. If you want to stop feeling like an imposter, you need to stop thinking like an imposter. And I just want to give you a bit of a working example of this. So write down your negative thought that comes into your head. Perhaps it's, I feel stupid at this event. I don't know enough. Write down why you feel that way. And it could be because everyone is so much more qualified and experienced than you. Write down the consequences of your thought. It will mean that I don't speak up and I don't ask questions. Convert your thought into an optimistic one. I'm going to learn so much from all the brilliant people here. And it does take time, it does take practice to ultimately reframe your thoughts. And it's certainly something that I have to do still when I attend events that are out of my comfort zone or run workshops that I've never done before. I'll always have that little voice in my head, and it's about how you deal with that and recognizing it for what it is. So in summary, the 8 ways in which to deal with imposter syndrome, just wanted to highlight them all here together. Accept it and explore it, remembering that there may be a very good reason why you feel out of place, like starting a new job and meeting new people. Adopt that growth mindset, accepting that you will never be the finished article. Share your feelings with some others. And as I say, definitely explore some TEDx talks. There's some great ones out there from high flyers who still admit to having imposter syndrome despite everything they've achieved. Focus on your values and what's important to you rather than comparing yourself to others. Modify your expectations and goals. Do a sense check of how realistic they are. Record those achievements, helping to build your confidence when you reflect back on them later. Create that community or join a group, which may take time and energy in the beginning, but will definitely help in the long term. And finally, that all-important point about rewriting your mental script. Recognizing that voice in your head which says you can't do something or you shouldn't be here, and changing it to be more positive. Remember, your negative thoughts do not define you. You can't get rid of imposter syndrome overnight. It's something that you need to work at. I just wanted to leave you with a couple of questions, which I like to do at the end of all our webinars. What will you now do differently? And what will happen if nothing changes? So for those of you who felt like an imposter syndrome, 75% or 100% of the time, what's going to be the consequences of that if you don't change how you operate, how you think? We are happy to take some more questions. Rachel, it looks like the chat's been fairly busy. It's been pinging up on my screen. Is there any common themes, any questions we want to open out?
No, there isn't any questions as such. Do you want to revisit the, do we want to go over what some of the attendees, their experiences of feeling imposter syndrome?
Yeah, no, it'd be good to hear some examples, yeah.
Okay, so let me pick out a few here. So applying for jobs, moving abroad and speaking a new language.
That's a very good one.
I shouldn't be paid that much feeling.
Say that again, sorry.
I shouldn't be paid that much feeling.
Yes, yeah, I love that one. That's a very common one.
Not feeling the confidence to ask questions in undergrad because feeling like everyone else knew the answer and that I should know the answer.
Yeah, Yeah, so many people in the room will have felt the same as you in that situation, I can promise you.
I really like this one. Whenever I achieve a good grade in my assignments, I always believe it was the simplicity of the task and it wasn't achieving of that grade.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for being so honest with sharing these. It's the first step to actually dealing with imposter syndrome. And it's one of the best things I ever did to deal with it, was to actually admit to feeling like that to others. And I admitted it to someone who was much more experienced than me, had years more experience in the sector, was older than me. And they said, oh yeah, I feel like that most days as well. They stood up and did presentations in front of a room full of 100 people, but they said that every time they stood up to do it, there was that voice in their head which said, why are you presenting on this? You're not an expert, you know. So that's the first step to it, is admitting to actually having it in the first place. Because actually, perhaps I feel a bit of imposter syndrome now delivering this webinar to yourselves, because I'm not an expert in this area. Certainly some of the quotes that I pulled from Dr. Valerie Young, she is, you know, she's someone to definitely look up.
And then I've got one more. As a very mature student, I feel it's not really my space.
Okay. What do you mean by that? So mature students, what is not your space? The degree you're doing, or that you're surrounded by younger people? I probably need a bit more context on that one. Just having a little look at some of the comments there as well. Was that surrounded by younger people? Yeah, no, I do get that. Yeah, so you don't feel that you belong. Perhaps it's a bit harder to bridge that gap in terms of experience and so on. I mean, I don't know how possible it is for you to reach out to other mature students, even if it's not necessarily on the same course, maybe not even the same university. I have seen some communities and groups that span different institutions in terms of bouncing off ideas and so on. But also with the younger people, don't rule them out just by age either, because actually there's quite a lot of similarities, a lot of things that you're dealing with in terms of remote learning and so on. There's a lot of comments there. I can't quite keep up, Rachel. Anything else to pull out there? Oh, someone's just putting a useful comment there. There's a mature student network at MMU. Yes, I've seen quite a few of them. Yeah.
There's they've got one comment here. I will now, and I'm currently trying to just do rather than question what if all the time.
Mm-hmm. That's good. I like that. Just, yeah, so that's actually quite positive. You're going for it. You're taking action rather than procrastinating and doubting yourself. So I'm not sure if you're one of the people who said that you suffer from imposter syndrome a lot, but from that kind of mindset, for me, it would imply that you don't suffer from it that much, because you are just going for it anyway. It's still quite useful to take some evaluation time, even if it is just a little, to think about why you did something. Was it the right course of action? I'd always encourage that, because yeah, you might want to feed that into future actions, future career plans and so on. But yeah, it's a good approach to sometimes just go for it. I like that.
And if we could just touch on this one, Helen. When attendee was a victim of workplace bullying a few years ago, have mainly overcome it, but sometimes those voices still creep in again, and that causing them to doubt themselves. Yeah,
that's such a shame. Sad to hear that. And again, one that does happen, and I've heard of other people suffering from this. I'd go back to a point around surrounding yourself with people who are going to build you up and give you that positive reinforcement. As I said, my colleague Sophie talks about having a tribe, and it might be that they're not people you immediately work with, but people that you can just sense check your ideas with. So you might say to them, oh, I felt like such an idiot at work yesterday because I did this, I made this mistake. And they'll be like, what? Well, against the scheme of things, that's really not that bad. Or they might say, that doesn't sound like you because you're usually like this. And they just force you to kind of rationalize your thoughts a little bit more, to question what you're doing. But yeah, you're on the first step there, because you recognize that you've still got those voices of doubt coming from that bullying, but see them for what they are. They're based on bullying. They're based on people who who bullied you because they themselves feel inadequate, and they've projected that onto you instead. So just really see it for what it is.
Helen, can negative comments from others worsen imposter syndrome?
They can certainly reinforce it, yeah. So if you feel like a fraud and someone tells you that you are, yes, it's going to affect your self-confidence if you listen to them. It would be worth, if someone does give you some negative feedback, explore the reasons for that, the context around it. Is there some substance to it, for example? Because what I wouldn't want to encourage is, what's sometimes seen as negative feedback can also be quite constructive. It can help you to improve and progress. And there's something to be said for seeing all feedback as valuable, because if someone tells you you've done something wrong, or perhaps you delivered a presentation and you sounded really nervous, you need to be more confident, you need to be more clear. Perhaps that will shake you up a little bit presenting next time, but ultimately it's good they've told you that, so you can do something about it, and be more clear and confident next time. So try and be objective when someone gives you feedback. Why have they said those things? Did other people think the same? And then what steps can you put in place to address that?
There's a question come through. Does SRS provide available job roles or vacancies for students looking to develop their career?
So I'm assuming that question is around, do we provide like kind of practice job roles? I mean, one of our things that we do is we run kind of simulated assessment centres, practice interviews. And as part of that, we create materials that reflect real jobs and real vacancies so that it feels more realistic when you are practicing it. These aren't kind of available. It's universities that hire us to support their students. We do some kind of individual coaching sessions with students and graduates outside of that. And we obviously recruit ourselves. We've just taken on 2 new people who are due to start with us shortly. But yeah, we aren't, we don't have our own job roles or vacancies unless you were to look at our sister company, which is Grad Touch. They advertise a lot of graduate roles and a lot of vacancies.
I really like this one. Can self-love be the solution to imposter syndrome?
I like that. That's a really good point. Yes, as long as it's in moderation, I would say. We all need to appreciate ourselves more, as long as you also give back and appreciate others. So you don't want self-love to become arrogance. But yeah, self-love for me is self-confidence at the same time. So yeah, it would help with imposter syndrome.
And looking to support others, Helen, is there a best way to comfort a person with deep imposter syndrome when he or she are progressing in their career, if you are a close friend?
So if you see someone struggling, be proactive. So make a point of actually getting them to sit down and talk about how they're feeling. Follow their career, notice when they're doing things well. They might tell you when they're doing what they've done on a daily basis or what they've achieved, and you can perhaps focus in on that and say, oh, that sounds really good, tell me about how you did that. Help to draw out the successes, help to rationalize their thoughts, because they might just sit down with you or get on the phone and have a rant about how they've had such a bad day and how they could have done this better and that didn't turn out the way they wanted it to. And you can provide some much needed objectivity to that, some rationale to that, to say, oh, well, that doesn't sound so bad. And actually considering everything else that was going on that you were having to deal with, that you actually came out with a good result. And also questions like, what did you learn from that? What are you going to do next time? You can be a bit of a mental coach for them. But I think for me, the main point would be to kind of regularly check in with them, to keep tabs on them, to be proactive, because a lot of people with imposter syndrome don't actually ask for help and don't admit to having it in the first place.
And then I've got one more, which I'm sure a lot of attendees can relate to. And they've said, I've been trying to rid myself of timidness. It seems a waste when you're gifted with amazing opportunities and don't have the confidence to take advantage of them.
Yeah, we had this come up on the other webinar. Actually, I do feel for you, and as I say, it's difficult to overcome. My tip would be to start small. So if you're someone who is scared of talking in front of large people, don't just jump to doing that straight away, because it's going to feel really tough. You want to start off smaller and present to perhaps speak to perhaps a couple of people, perhaps a couple of people you know really well, who are going to listen and give you feedback, and then kind of build up from there. So thinking about some of these online events where you get to listen, and then there's these breakout networking opportunities where sometimes people are too timid to ask questions and comment. Set yourself a little objective. Think, right, well, I'm not going to ask a question because that's almost too much for me, but I'm going to comment on someone else's question or idea, or I'm going to say that you're going to make a comment about something. If that means agreeing with someone, just start off small, break it down, set yourself small steps to work up to the bigger goal of being able to actually like lead a conversation in a networking space and present to a lot of people at once. Back to that kind of baby steps point. Okay. I hope I've helped answer some of your questions there, but I'm not going to lie. You know, I'm not an expert at imposter syndrome, so I've certainly suffered from it, and I've certainly seen a lot of candidates and students that I've interacted with have it, and the webinars based on a lot of stuff that I've picked up over the years and some of the reading that I've done. It's a fascinating topic to explore further and read more up on, because you don't want it to hinder your career. So any small steps that you can put in place to make that change, to enable you to think more positively going forward, please do. Okay. Brilliant. Well, when you do leave the webinar, as always, you'll be taken to a very short survey. Just take you 2 minutes. Really appreciate your thoughts on if you found the webinar useful. And please join us on the subsequent webinars as well. We've had some great chats and great interaction from you. Really appreciate it. Thank you.